Hello everyone, welcome to Java Developers. If you are a beginner to microservices or you want to learn about microservices, then this video is for you. So we are going to discuss about monolithic architecture, the microservices introduction, and the importance of using microservices architecture, and finally the benefits and drawbacks of using microservices. Okay, let's get started. The monolithic application means a single-tiered software application in which both the user interface and data access code are combined into a single artifact. To understand clearly, let's imagine we want to create an e-commerce application. So let's have a sample architecture here. So in this architecture, we have inventory, account, payment, and checkout. So these are the modules are present in this application. All the modules functionality are present in a single code base. So which means all the developers are working in a single code base and they have to depend on each other. If there is any code changes on a specific module, per se account, there is a chance to impact other modules as well, because most of the modules are interdependent and tightly coupled. This monolithic software approach provides a single deployable file. In case of a Java developer, it may be var file or the EAR file, right? So this software practice will reduce the developer's productivity and the code efficiency of that application, right? So let's talk about the drawbacks of monolithic architecture. Interdependency, frequent deploy, big code base, lack of tech flexibility, testing time consuming. So interdependency means if you have the more dependence on this modules, it will create a more tightly coupled features among those modules, and it will reduce the code usage as well. And also the developers might find difficulty to maintain the design principles and find difficulty to implement the design patterns as well, right? The frequent deploy. So imagine if you have a small change in one of the module, like a payment module, then the whole application will get redeployed on the production environment. So this will increase the cost for infrastructure and it is difficult to scale the application. And there is no functionality wise impact on other modules. There is only a small change in one of the module. It requires the application to be redeployed on the production, right? Let's go to the big code base. If the application development keeps growing, the code base also grows it, right? The developer might find difficulty to handle the code base. So if your business keeps growing, then there is a chance you'll be adding a more functionality to this application. Then the code base of the application also keeps growing. So it is better to break down those applications into multiple applications. So let's talk about microservices later. So next drawback is lack of tech feasibility. So all the developers will be forced to write the code in a single programming language, right? For example, let's take the payment module. This can be done good in a different programming language like a Python, but it is not possible to implement this specific module in a different programming language because these are interdependencies with other modules and has a tightly coupled, right? So it will be difficult to handle the functionalities if written in the different programming as well. The final drawback is testing time consuming. The tester team will take more time to complete the regression testing, never like before. As I said earlier, if the functionality grows, your code base grows, but if there is no impact on this functionality wise which you are currently doing for the present deployment, the tester has to test that functionality as well, even though there is no functionality changes. So the tester will continue to test that module even though there is no significant changes present in the functionality wise for other modules. Okay, so these are the problems we are facing with the monolithic architecture. So let's go to the microservice architecture. So in the microservice architecture, it is a type of applications pattern, like we'll be creating the collection of services. So all these modules will be created as a separate application, and they will be having a separate database as well. All these modules can be developed independently by the developers. So which means the developers can create an inventory application as a Java. They can use a Java programming. An account module, they can use a Go programming language. So likewise, those are independent each other. And the microservice pattern, architecture pattern, is a starting point for creating the cloud native application. So nowadays, if you look into the industry, the enterprises are going towards the cloud. If you know about the microservices architecture, it is good, and it's a starting point for creating the cloud application as well. And this cloud application will be deploying on the leading cloud platform like Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure or even Google Cloud Platform. Okay, so let's talk about the benefits of using microservice architecture. Flexibility to use tech, scale independently, deploy specific apps, less dependent on apps, decentralization. So let's go one by one. Flexibility to use tech. So as we talked earlier, we can use different programming languages to develop the modules. The only point here is we'll be exposing the APIs to other modules. So from the functionality wise or from the coding point of view, all those modules are not dependent on each other, like we saw in the monolithic approach, right? So it is up to the developers. It is up to the developers' freedom. They can use whatever programming language they want to use it. The second is scale independently. For example, if you take the payment module, that may require more scaling. So which means this module should run on multiple virtual machines than compared to other modules. So the account module, it is okay to run on a single VM, and the payment module, which requires to run on 4 virtual VMs. So in this case, we can scale these modules independently. So by scaling, it will not impact on other modules as well, right? And third one is a deploy specific apps. So in this case, if I have changed in the payment module, I do not want to deploy all the modules again. Instead, it is okay to deploy the specific module which I have the code changes. So if you look back into the monolithic approach, we either the other modules has a code changes or not, it is forced to deploy the whole application on the production. So in this case, in monolithic application, it is okay to deploy the specific module which has the code changes. Okay, so fourth advantage is less dependent on apps. So which means like as I talked earlier, there will not be any design principal issues in that microservice architecture. So the developer can easily focus on maintaining the design principles and the design patterns. So it is not, by doing so, it will not impact or create a tight coupling with other modules as well. The last point is a decentralization. So in the case of monolith, we saw there will be a single code base where all the modules will be written in the single code base itself, right? When the application grows, the code base also grows it. In the case of microservices approach, each module has a separate code base, right? So the one module does not want to depend on other module, right? So it is up to the developer, it's up to the business point of view whether this particular modules are required or not. For example, let's take that some module X which is not required, then this module can be removed from that microservices safely. So we saw the benefits of microservices architecture. So let's talk about the drawbacks of using microservices architecture. Debugging is hard, lack of API docs, production monitor is hard, DevOps complexity. So debugging is hard. So in the case of Monolith, the debugging is quite easy. So it is a single application. We can debug easily. We can go through the code. But in the case of microservices, it is a chain of application. It is a chain of microservices, so that functionality wise it will interact with other microservice. For example, I'm using the account microservice, and then I want to see the products available to the UI. So the inventory microservice will be called. So those are the functionality wise it is difficult to debug it. The second drawback is lack of API docs. So some of the developers may not have included the API documentation as well. They may not have included the Swagger file for those microservices. So in this case, if the other developers wants to work on that microservices, it is very difficult for them to understand the APIs. So it will take time consuming to understand the code and to understand the API which is created for that module, right? So it is always good to include the API documentation for all the microservices. So the third part is production monitor is hard. So we have that n number of microservices being created for the business, and it is very hard to monitor all the microservices. So the developers might have worked on the multiple microservices, and they have to keep an eye on that most of the microservices which they whether is there any issues or exception of being occurred on the production environment or not. So it is quite challenging for the developers under that infrastructure team to handle it. The final drawback is the DevOps complexity. The DevOps team will be creating multiple CI/CD pipelines for the microservice architecture. In the case of monolithic application, the DevOps team will be creating a single CI/CD, so it is easy to handle and maintain the single pipeline when compared to the microservice approach. So we have seen the drawbacks of using that microservices architecture. So let me know if you have any queries on the comment section. Please like the video and subscribe the channel. Thank you for watching.